Good evening, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me all right? What a beautiful rainy night, y'all. We've had rain since 3 p.m. this afternoon. Very rainy out there. What an awesome night to be reading a book when it's raining outside. Have you seen the video for chapters 9 and 10? And find out what's going on. It's pretty awesome. I can't wait to see what's going to happen in this chapter. My goodness. That's for sure. How many of you are looking forward to this chapter? And we're going to get started. Last night I was really froggy. So Paula says, I'm ready. I took my medicine, so I'm hoping that'll keep me from that bronchitis season. You know how that goes. All right, we are going to go right into chapter 9. Libby thought long and hard about how best to approach Lydia Goetz. It would have helped if Philip had showed up at the gym the following morning, but he hadn't, so she didn't get the chance to question him further. Robin urged Libby to stop by the yarn shop as soon as possible and talk to Lydia. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one who had to face a woman she barely knew with this potentially devastating news. As she mulled all this over, Libby was filled with dread. She paced the living area in her condo, checking her watch every 5 minutes until 10 o'clock. That is when the good yarn opened. She left the condo around 9:45 a.m. and decided to walk, hoping the exercise would inspire her on how best to approach the subject. She needed just the right words, if there was such a thing. Lydia, your 13-year-old daughter might be pregnant. How did anyone just say that? Wanting to delay the conversation, Libby stopped at Savannah's garden and aimlessly wandered around. The scent of flowers didn't lift her mood as she would. Instead, she found herself thinking of all the flowers that family and friends had sent her mother's funeral. There had been so many bouquets that her father had given several away. Libby left the flower shop without making a purchase. The bell above the door chimed as she entered the yarn store. Lydia's face brightened with a welcoming smile. She was such a warm, kind person, and Libby feared this news would devastate her. Libby, it's good to see you. Are you having any problems with baby blanket you're working on? No. She glanced around the shop. Lydia was alone. Either her sister Margaret was with their mother, or else she would arrive later. I was hoping the two of us would have time for a chat, Libby said, avoiding eye contact. Her voice was low and, despite her best efforts, filled with trepidation. Of course, Libby. Her friend led the way to the back of the shop and automatically poured them each a cup of coffee. Black, right? Right. Oh, how she missed that half and half, but she had given it up as part of her plan for dropping those extra 10 pounds. Lydia handed her the mug, and they both sat down at the table. I hesitate to say anything, Libby said, staring at her coffee. I wouldn't if it wasn't a health and legal issue. And, well, a health and legal issue, Lydia repeated. Now she too seemed alarmed. I think it might be best if I start at the beginning, Libby suggested. She tried to think of the best way to lead into the subject with some finesse and hadn't come up with a single idea. The only way, she resolved, was to be direct as possible. Yes, please start at the beginning. Lydia held onto her coffee mug with both hands, as if she needed to cling to something solid. Remember when I went to Seattle General with Casey and Ava about a week and a half ago? Of course, you dropped off the preemie hats. Right. Well, we were there. We met Dr. Stone in the elevator. Oh, yes, Lydia brightened somewhat. The girls were impressed with the handsome Dr. Stone. He recognized me because we work out at the same gym. So the girls said. Apparently, Libby had said more than she realized. He recently asked to speak to me privately. Lydia smiled knowingly. Really? Don't get the wrong impression. I can categorically tell you that Dr. Stone isn't the least bit interested in me personally. Oh, Libby, are you disappointed? No, not at all. She shook her head, not wanting to get sidetracked. The thing is, he felt it was important we talk because the bell above the door chimed, indicating that Lydia had a customer. Libby groaned in and forced her to sit back. Her entire body felt coiled, like she was a warrior going into battle. Her senses were on full alert. Adrenaline was pumping hard and fast through her veins. While Lydia dealt with the customer, Margaret arrived. Libby had grown accustomed to her brisk ways and knew not to take offense. She suspected that beneath that gruff exterior was a gentle soul. Libby knew that Margaret was fiercely protective of her sister and wished she could have continued her conversation with Lydia in private. Margaret wouldn't take kindly to her upsetting Lydia. Hello, Libby, Margaret said as she put her purse inside the small office. She returned with a mug of coffee. Lydia finished with her customer, and almost immediately someone else stepped into the store. Hesitating, Libby wondered if it might be best for her to return another time. Then she decided it was now or never. Otherwise, she might lose her courage. Lydia seemed to feel the same way because she asked her sister to help the next customer. Libby and I are having a bit of a talk here. Could you cover for me, she asked. Sure thing, Margaret set aside her coffee and headed to the front of the store. Okay, Lydia said, reclaiming her seat. You were about to say. Libby inhaled and briefly closed her eyes. Dr. Stone asked to speak with me because after meeting the girls in the elevator, he was convinced one of them is pregnant. What? Lydia's shock echoed through the store. Margaret stopped short, and so did the woman she was helping. "Everything all right back there?" Margaret asked. "It's fine," Lydia murmured. Her eyes held Libby captive. "This is a joke, right?" Libby shook her head. The sick feeling in the pit of her stomach returned. "I wish it was. It is, Casey. I don't know if it's her or Ava." She wanted to slap Philip for not being clearer. He had assumed she would remember the girl on her right. Or was it his right? Her gut reaction told her it was Ava, just from the way the girl behaved, but she couldn't be sure. She almost said so, but changed her mind. She simply didn't know. Lydia had gone pale. She brushed the soft brown hair off her forehead and held her hand there. Brad caught Casey trying to sneak out of the house the other night. It wasn't the first time. "We don't know where she goes, and she won't tell us." Libby's stomach twisted into a giant knot. Maybe she was off base. What about Ava? She's a sweet girl and all, but from what I've seen of her grandmother, well, let's just say the living situation isn't ideal. It could be her. Dr. Stone said that Casey or Ava might not even know about her condition. How can he tell, really? It's only speculation, right? Lydia seemed to be clinging to the possibility that it wasn't true, and this was all a big mistake. Her shock and disbelief mirrored Libby's own response when Philip had approached her. Surely this was pure speculation, misguided concern, or a misunderstanding. The girls were both so young and naive, pregnant at 13. It shocked and angered her. Still, Libby couldn't ignore what she knew, couldn't pretend he was off base. He was the physician, not her. I'm not entirely sure how he knew. Dr. Stone didn't say, but he was concerned enough to approach me. I wish I could explain this further. Dr. Stone and I only spoke for a few minutes before he was called away for an emergency. I haven't seen him since. Perhaps it would have been better to wait, but this entire matter had weighed so heavily on her mind that Libby couldn't ignore it any longer. Ever since her meeting with Philip, she slept fitfully. Lydia's hands started to shake. If Libby knew her better, she would have reached across the table and gripped a hold of the other woman's forearm. She wanted to comfort her, to offer Lydia reassurance, but she had none to give. "Why did he bring this to you?" Lydia asked. "He assumed the girl was my daughter." Oh. The bell chimed as the customer left the store. Within seconds, Margaret joined them. "What's going on back here?" she demanded. Libby left it up to Lydia to respond. Lydia glanced blankly up at her sister and remained silent. "Something I need to look into. I need to talk to Brad." Eyes, Margaret studied Libby suspiciously. After a few uncomfortable moments, she left the two of them alone again. "My husband and I wanted to adopt an infant," Lydia whispered. "We had a wonderful social worker, and then one night we got a phone call. It was an emergency situation. We needed a place for a young girl just for a couple of nights." Libby nodded. She remembered Casey telling her that she was adopted. "We fell in love with Casey. Brad, Cody, and I decided to make her part of our family." She paused and looked as if she was about to break down and weep. Libby wanted to say or do something to help, but didn't have a clue how she could. The day we stood before the judge to finalize the adoption, Casey was so happy and excited she ran up and hugged the judge. A tear spilled out of the corner of her eye and scooted down the side of Lydia's face. But Casey came with a lot of baggage. Libby could only imagine. The last 6 months haven't been easy. Adolescence and all the hormones have kicked in. Casey started her period. Lydia's mouth snapped closed and she pressed her fingertips over her lips. Her eyelids slammed shut. She inhaled and seemed to be holding her breath. More tears rolled down her face. Lydia. Libby felt helpless. She would give anything to take this all back. The last thing she wanted was to hurt her new friend or bring a problem to the front steps. Lydia swallowed tightly and whispered, I don't know if Casey had a period last month. Libby's stomach clenched. One of the reasons I decided I had to say something is because of the legal issues involved. Lydia stared at her blankly. How do you mean? If Casey is pregnant, you'll need to find out who the father is. If he's over 18, then it's statutory rape. Criminal charges will need to be filed. Do you know if Casey has a boyfriend? Lydia nodded. She does. How old is he? I don't know. I think they're about the same age. He's junior high. They're in the same class. 13. Libby didn't know if it was possible for a 13-year-old boy to father a child. She was utterly inexperienced when it came to such matters. Children having children, Lydia whispered. What are you going to do? It wasn't her business, Libby realized. If she were the one facing this delicate situation, Libby would be at an utter loss as to how best to handle it. I don't know. I need to talk to my husband. A partner in life, someone to share her burdens, someone to cry with and laugh with. Libby had relinquished all of that, and for what? On the other hand, during the last 6 months of their marriage, all Joe and Libby had seemed to do was disagree. She worked hard all day and often after hours as well, and when she got home, she was tired. Joe was far more sociable than she. Coming from a large family, he was accustomed to being around people. Then, there was the matter of starting a family. The timing had been all wrong for her. Nonetheless, she still thought about Joe now and again. She sincerely hoped he was happy, and she was pleased that he had moved on in his life. Brad will know how best to handle this. I'm sure he will, Libby whispered. The bell continued to chime, and Lydia looked up at the same time as Libby. The shop had a number of customers. Margaret needs my help. Libby nodded and left soon afterward. She returned to her apartment, but could not settle down. She wanted to apologize and tell her friend how sorry she was to be the bearer of bad news. Instead of feeling better, she felt 10 times worse. She hoped Lydia and her husband would find out what they needed to know and deal with it in a way that best suited Casey. Then again, it might be Ava. Her cell chirped and she retrieved it from her purse. It was Robin. So, did you talk to Lydia? I did. And how did it go? Libby wasn't sure what to say. It had been horrible. She hurt her friend and felt responsible even though she tried her best to help. She was shocked, of course. I'm sure she was. She's going to talk to her husband first and then to Casey. You did the right thing, Robin assured her. Libby believed that too, which made her appreciate how difficult it had been for Philip to seek her out. Even more depressed than usual, Libby sat down in front of her computer and checked the job sites she had been searching. She didn't know why she bothered. Her cell rang again. She checked the caller ID and saw that it was Sarah. She hadn't talked in a couple of weeks. Libby wasn't sure she was up to chatting. Their conversations had grown shorter as the months passed. Outside the office, they had little in common. Libby felt compelled to put on a good front, convincing both Sarah and herself that it was just a matter of days before she found another position. It was becoming more and more difficult to continue the lie. She answered on the fourth ring, just before the call went to voicemail. "Hello?" "Libby," Sarah whispered as she feared of being overheard. "Mrs. Reed was in this afternoon." Martha Reed? Libby had worked extensively on setting up the older woman's estate, creating a number of trusts. She liked and admired Mrs. Reed. "She's not happy," Sarah continued, keeping her voice low. "I heard her complaining to Herschel. She asked about you and said Ben Holmes isn't half the attorney you are. She said she's thinking of moving her business." "She said that?" Libby instantly perked up. "She doesn't like Ben working on her foundation business." "What did Herschel say?" Libby was all ears. This was the first bit of encouraging news that she had had in weeks. Just that she was one of the firm's most important clients, and he would do whatever it took to make Mrs. Reed happy. Libby sincerely hoped that meant he would consider hiring her back. At one time, she would have taken a great deal of pleasure in turning him down, refusing him and walking away with her head held high. That was then, and this was almost 5 post-employment. If Herschel were to phone, she'd swallow her pride, sincerely thank him, and show up chipper and happy and with her briefcase in hand. Sounds like after the months have passed, she definitely would take the job back. Oh my goodness. She's getting desperate for a job. Yeah, it's hard whenever we have to tell a friend something that we know that they should be told. It's really hard. It's really hard because you don't know how it's going to be accepted or what to say, and sometimes, just as she did, it's best to just say it outright. I'm going to take a quick drink, y'all, and I'll be right back. Chapter 10. Lydia Goetz couldn't hold still. The conversation with Libby Morgan had upset her terribly, and while she tried to hide it from Margaret, her sister knew something was drastically wrong. She tried several times to get Lydia to talk, but she remained tight-lipped and agitated the rest of the afternoon. Casey pregnant. She couldn't stop thinking about what that would mean to their family, how she and Brad would deal with the situation. When they had decided to adopt Casey, they accepted that this would not be a smooth road. While their daughter was thrilled to be a part of a family, she continued to have her issues, but this was far and away more than either Lydia or Brad had expected. Pregnant at such a young age, it didn't seem possible, and yet. At home, it didn't take Brad long to discern that something or someone had deeply distressed Lydia. No more than 10 minutes after she walked in the door, Brad asked, "What's up?" He followed her into the kitchen and leaned against the door jamb with his arms folded. "We need to talk," she whispered, for fear he would hear the tremble in her voice. She removed the roast cooking in the crock pot and placed it on a serving dish, and then grabbed a hold of the counter, afraid she was about to burst into tears. Okay, when? Not now, after we eat. You sure you want to wait that long? He asked. Fearing she might break into tears if she answered, Lydia nodded. Mealtime was a miserable affair. All through dinner, Lydia could barely look at Casey. Her mood seemed to be contagious. She caught Cody and Casey exchanging looks. Cody shrugged as if to say he didn't know what was wrong. Casey didn't say a word after the first few minutes. When the teenager finished her meal, she helped with the dishes and quickly retired to her bedroom. What's up with everyone? Cody asked after Casey left the room. Nothing, Brad told him. Why do parents always say that? The youth muttered under his breath. He shook his head and then went outside to play baseball with his friends. As soon as Cody was out the door, Brad turned to Lydia. All right, what gives? Lydia sat across from her husband and covered her face with both hands, unsure if she could get through this. That bad? Worse. Then let's deal with it together. Brad reached for her hand and gave her fingers a squeeze. Did you get a report from the doctor you're not telling me about? It was only her husband would assume this distress was related to her problem with cancer. Twice she had been treated for cancerous brain tumors. Treated. The word discounted the torment she had endured. Her first go-around took place when she was only 16. The tumors returned again later when she was in her early 20s. Lydia had nearly died both times. Although she had been cancer-free for 15 years, there was always the fear that the tumors would return. Lydia had learned far earlier than most people do in a life what holds few guarantees. Every day was a precious. She opened the yarn store as an affirmation of life, determined not to allow fear to dominate whatever time she had left. This doesn't have anything to do with cancer, she assured him. The relief in his eyes spoke of the deep love and concern. I had a customer come in this morning first thing. I might have mentioned her. She's the attorney who has been unemployed for a now. Oh, the one who knits like 30 preemie cats over one weekend. Smiling briefly, Lydia nodded. That's the one. Her name is Libby. She went with Casey and Ava to drop off the donation from the knitters to Seattle General. Brad's brow furrowed. I think I remember you telling me about that. The girls were perfectly capable of going on their own, but I was grateful to have an adult with them. Lydia paused and bit into her lower lip. While they were at the hospital, Libby met a doctor she knows from the gym where she works out. He asked to speak to her privately afterward. And what did he say? She looked down at her hands, which were clenched together so tightly that her nail beds were white. He assumed one of the girls was her daughter, and he felt it was important to tell Libby that he suspects one of them is pregnant. Lydia could barely get out the last word from her mouth. Brad bolted up in his chair, knocking it over. You've got to be joking. His shocked, disbelieving reaction mirrored her own. I wish I was. Brad's gaze narrowed. How would he know? I don't know, but he's a physician. He wasn't sure, but he was concerned enough that he felt he should mention it. His fear was that the teen didn't even realize she was pregnant. Again, she nearly stumbled over the word. Brad picked up the chair and sat down again, wiping his hand across his face, as if he needed time to assimilate what she had told him. It had taken a few minutes for Lydia to understand the ramifications of this news, too. His eyes flickered about the room as though searching out something to focus on that would help him digest the situation. Could it be Casey? He asked after several tense moments. Clearly, he didn't want to believe it any more than she did. We don't know everything she does, she reminded him. They had yet to learn where Casey had been going when they found her sneaking out of the house at midnight. You had the talk with her, right? Lydia nodded. It had been uncomfortable because Casey probably knew more about the subject of sex than Lydia did. The kid had seen more in her 13 years than Lydia had in a lifetime. Casey had been patient and even asked a couple of questions after Lydia had explained the basic facts of life to her. To her chagrin, Lydia hadn't brought up the subject of disease or teenage pregnancy. She figured that a little information was better than none, and she could fill in the gaps later. As it turned out, she might have been too late. Oh my goodness. It could be Ava, offered, and immediately felt wishing it on the other girl, rather than her own daughter. Casey's motherless friend was shy and vulnerable. Lydia had been pleased when Casey befriended her and brought her to the yarn shop. Ava and her older brother were left alone all day while the grandmother waited tables at the local cafe. At the end of her shift, she apparently didn't feel any compulsion to hurry home. From what Ava said, her grandmother spent part of each night in a neighborhood tavern, leaving Ava and her brother to their own devices. Brad squared his shoulders and said, "We need to talk to Casey." "You can talk to me now." Casey stood in the doorway leading to the kitchen. Her face was blank and her eyes were focused on the floor. "Come and sit with us," Lydia said. She stood and wrapped her arms around her daughter. Casey shrugged her off and moved to the chair at the far end of the table. She lowered her head and looked down, avoiding eye contact. "I know what this is about," she said. Brad and Lydia exchanged looks. "You want to get right? Send me back to foster care." Lydia gasped. "Casey, no, never." What would make you even think such a thing?" Brad demanded angrily. "You're our daughter. We brought you into our family, and that's for good." "Casey, don't you know how much we loved you?" Lydia asked, because clearly she didn't. Casey's shoulders started to shake, and tears fell from her eyes, splashing onto the tabletop. Irritated, she wiped them away as though the weakness embarrassed her. "I thought you didn't want me anymore. I thought you wanted me to leave." Casey so rarely cried that Lydia saw how upset her daughter, that tears formed in her own eyes. She stood and wrapped her arms around Casey's shoulders. Leaning down, she pressed her head next to Casey's hands on her shoulders, and together the two of them sobbed. It wasn't long before Brad joined them, wrapping his arms around the two of them. He left momentarily and returned with a box of tissues. Lydia blew her nose, and so did Casey. After taking a moment to compose herself, Lydia sat back down and scooted her chair close to Casey, and then reached out for her hand. "You need to know something important," Lydia whispered. "Brad, Cody, and I ask you to be part of our family. We made this decision together because we realize this is where you belong. You are our daughter, and nothing could ever change that. What, what if I did something terrible? She asked. Nothing, Lydia repeated. No matter what it is, we'll deal with it together as a family. You need to understand that while I might have not given birth to you physically, you are a part of me, a part of my heart. Casey sniffled again. Don't even think that your mother and I would make you go back to foster care, Brad said. It's not going to happen. I might rebel when I get older. Lots do. We might not always agree, Casey, but whether you share our views or not, you will remain our daughter. Always and forever, Lydia reiterated. We're a family. Casey blinked as if the concept was beyond anything she had ever imagined. You will always love me no matter what I do? Lydia heard the skepticism in her daughter's question. Parents love their children. We might not always approve of the things you do. We might not like your friends or cringe at some of the choices you make, but that doesn't change our love. You'll love me no matter what? Brad looked to Lydia and then answered, no matter what. Casey frowned as if she had found that difficult to believe. You love me as much as Cody? Without question, Lydia said. Casey relaxed against the back of the chair. Wow. Gave her a few moments to let their words soak in before continuing the conversation. Brad broke the silence. Can you tell us where you were going the other night when you tried to sneak out? Casey stared at the table. I'd rather not. It wasn't bad, though, I promise. Lydia felt she had to trust her daughter. We need to ask you something, Brad said. He, too, had nudged his chair closer to their daughter. Casey's hand tightened around Lydia's. Okay, she said, looking and sounding unsure. She wiped her index finger across her upper lip and sniffled. Lydia handed her another tissue. Your mother talked to a friend today, Brad said. She was with you and Ava when you went to the hospital. Oh, you mean Libby? Casey asked, looking up for the first time. Yes, it's the doctor you saw in the elevator. Dr. Stone, he's hot. Lydia was grateful. Casey, hi Anna, how are you, hon? Lydia was grateful Casey had lightened her mood, although they yet had to broach the subject of pregnancy. If there was even a pregnancy, perhaps it was wishful hoping on her part, but Lydia still found it difficult to believe that either Casey or her friend Ava could possibly be pregnant. Dr. Stone told Libby that he suspected one of you girls is pregnant. Pregnant, Casey repeated slowly. No way. If you are pregnant, Lydia said, wanting to be sure Casey understood that she shouldn't be afraid to tell them, then Dad and I are here to help you. The most important thing is to get you to a doctor. The baby, well, we'll deal with that subject when the time comes. What's important is that you know you can come to us with anything. You seriously think I'm pregnant? She asked, her head rearing back. We don't know, Brad told her. That's why we're asking. It's not me. You sure? One of the things Dr. Stone said was that you might not even know you're carrying a baby. It's not me, Casey insisted. No angel came to see me, and I'm not giving birth to Jesus. Hello, Sarah. How are you, honey? Oh. It's coming. Give it a minute. There you go. Got you back? All right. I had to put my bookmark in there just in case. Lydia smiled in spite of herself. Could it be Ava? Brad asked. Casey shook her head. No. Dr. Stone is wrong. How would he know anyway? We were only with him a few minutes. This was the same question Lydia and Brad had both asked. Libby had said one of the reasons she came to me is because there might be a legal involved. I'm still, she seemed embarrassed to say the word. A virgin, Lydia supplied. Yeah, good, Brad said forcefully. Keep it that way. Casey blinked several times. I won't always be, Dad. I'll get married and have kids one day. You know that. No problem, Brad raised his hand as though surrendering, but I want you to wait until you're at least 30. Dad. Just kid. Lydia rubbed her thumb over the top of Casey's hand. I think I should probably call Ava's grandmother, she said, thinking out loud. Don't, Casey urged. Her grandmother isn't there half of the time anyway. Ava thinks having them with her makes her sad because her daughter died, and now she's stuck with them. But her grandmother needs to know so she can talk to Ava. Casey considered that for several moments, gnawing at her lower lip. Let me do it. Casey, I appreciate the offer, but I think I should be the one. Mom, I can help Ava. I know I can. Ava trusts me. The other night when I snuck out of the house, yes, Brad said, I was helping Ava. I brought her food. I have a few times now. Her grandmother said she's getting fat and would only let her eat salad for dinner, and she has gotten really hungry, so I took her some food. They both fell silent as the implication that Ava was getting fat sank in. Oh, Casey. Lydia hardly knew what to say. I appreciate that. You want to talk to your friend, but there are a lot of factors involved. Let me be the one, Casey pleaded. If you do, then I doubt she'll ever come back to the yarn store. She might open up to me, but she would never with you. Brad placed his hands on Lydia's arm. Maybe you should let her. Lydia reluctantly agreed. She liked Ava, but it was true that the girl hardly said a word whenever she was around. Ava seemed to draw deeper into herself when she was at the store, and Casey had taken the other girl under her wing. But it went against Lydia's better judgment to put this on Casey's shoulders. Let me think on it, okay? Casey nodded and then brightened. Maybe Libby should be the one. Libby, Lydia repeated. Ava likes Lydia a lot. Casey volunteered. She told me so. That's a possibility, Lydia repeated slowly. Libby's mother died when she was the same age as Ava. She talked to Ava, too, when we went to the hospital. Ava didn't say much, but I could tell she really likes Libby. She listened to her. I know she would. And that was the answer, Lydia mused, as a huge sense of relief filled her. She would ask Libby to talk to Ava. If the girl liked and trusted Libby, then perhaps she would open up. Oh my goodness. Well, at least we know it's not their daughter, just to Ava. Oh my gosh, this book just gets better and better. Wow, guys, it has been an exciting 2 chapters. And I hope you have enjoyed those 2 chapters. And we will meet at the same place, same time, Let me know how you are enjoying the books in the comment. I would appreciate it. This is Debbie McComber, best-selling author starting now, and we have gone back to Blossom Street with different characters this time. Very, very interesting, good book. I love this book, and I hope you are loving it too. Thank you, Paula. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. And I'll tell you what, until next week, stay safe, stay warm, stay dry. It's raining out there. And always, always be kind. Hey, Sarah. Have a good evening, y'all.